the last set of presentations that is under the title of Detained and Deterred, Detention or Immediate Removal in the Age of COVID-19. Dr. Jeremy Slack, who will be also presenting, he earned his PhD in geography at the University of Arizona in 2015. He has been working on the US-Mexico border since 2003, studying migration, deportation, and the impacts of widespread drug violence on immigration. His recent book, Deported to Death: How Drug Violence is Changing Migration on the US-Mexico Border, that was published in 2019, explores issues such as kidnapping, forced recruitment, extortion, and asylum. His recent work has explored asylum seekers, detention, and immigration courts. In turn, Edith Tapia, she's native to El Paso, El Juarez borderland, and has been working with the Hope Border Institute since November 2016 as the policy research analyst. Edith has led Hope's community-based research efforts, including immigration court observation, and co-authored Hope's research reports on denouncing due process and human rights violations in the hands of US immigration agencies. Before she joined Hope, Edith worked in the Tarahumara region in northwest Mexico, where she managed the social economy program for a local NGO. She holds a BA bachelor's degree in economics and international relations from Smith College, as well as a master's degree in globalization and development from the University of London, SOAS. So thank you both, Jeremy and Edith, and the mic is yours now.
Hi, yes, thank you so much for having us. Edith, you can hear us, right?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Unfortunately, Edith's video wasn't working, so you'll just have to look at me, but she will be here as well. Today, what we really wanted to talk a little bit about, the immigration enforcement impacts of this crisis. I think for myself, other scholars, and also other advocates, a lot of the work we've been doing in the Trump era has really been to try and understand the empirical reality on the ground, right? What has been going on in reality? We see a huge disconnect between things like what the law says, what the official form that things are supposed to take place, and what is actually happening. And so we've been dealing with this very chaotic situation for 3 years now. And what the coronavirus has done is inject even more chaos into an already chaotic and complex situation that we are still trying to catch up with every day. And so, a lot of things are emerging. We don't really know exactly how things are going to shake out here. And so we wanted to start with talking about 3 areas, one being detention, the Remain in Mexico program, also known as the Migrant Protection Protocols, MPP, and the immigration court, as well as how this relates to bigger questions about what is going to happen in the long run, right? What are some of the potential scary consequences that we may see along the border? And a lot of this has to do with the United States Border Patrol's refusal to basically acknowledge asylum anymore, that individuals are being returned directly to Mexico or to their home countries, and claims of fear are no longer being recognized right now. So I think with that, maybe Edith, you want to start with discussions of MPP and detention?
Yes, thank you. One of the things that, as Jeremy has been saying, what we have learned with COVID-19 is that a lot of the injustice systems across the world and different policy or different areas is highlighted by this, right? So in immigration, this is also the case. And when Remain in Mexico, this is a policy that has been in effect for a year now, a year and a few months. And what we know is that, it forces people to stay in Mexico while they await their immigration process, which is already a highly problematic practice that the U.S. has been doing. What happens with COVID-19 is that it forces people even more to be in limbo. So for people that have been remaining in Mexico for the last year, in Juarez, we have over 20,000 people who have been placed in the program. Over 17,000 of them are still waiting for their proceedings in Ciudad Juarez. And at least almost 7,000 of them have been waiting for more than 6 months at this point. So what we know now is that large percentage of people now have to wait and see what really happens and continue to be in a pause for their life in one way, yet in another, facing the reality of danger, of not having adequate access to shelter many times, and just being in precarious conditions. So with the COVID-19, it really just reinforces the unjust and immoral way that MPP plays out, right? So in Ciudad Juarez, there are about 18 shelters that have popped up since the program was implemented. However, in terms of beds available, there's less than 2,000 or about 2,000 beds available, and that's just not enough, for this number of people that are in the program. We know that there's no such thing as social distancing, when it comes to for people that are in shelters or that are in rented apartments that are shared, common spaces. There's just no way for them to actually take or follow the recommendations that people or the governments are letting them know, because that's just not the reality, and they have very little control over that in their day-to-day life. Shelters have also began to set precautions, like not letting people in, whether it is a legal service provider that's going in to do New rights presentations, to answer questions about what is actually going to happen to their cases. Many of them are not being allowed into the shelters, mostly as a precaution, because they know that they are essentially sitting ducks, right? Like if one person gets it, it's most likely that they're all going to get it, and they're just not wanting to risk that. But also, what that does is that it, unfortunately, it just makes access to information just really scarce, and there's a lot of fear, and that has to do in part in terms of the fact that the U.S. government has now stopped the courts. The immigration courts have been postponed until May 1st, but for people that had hearings in these days in between, they still have to go to court. They still have to go to the bridge as if they were going to be transferred to the court, but they're not allowed in, but they have to wait there until they're giving new notices. What that means is that they're also exposed there. It also means that they have to take their entire family with all of their belongings out of the shelter, and it is uncertain how many of them will actually be allowed back in if they do go out, right? There's just a lot of fears to them not wanting to go because they're going to miss their place, or not wanting to go because they're going to get exposed to other people, and for no reason at all, right? Where unfortunately they're just having to do this so that they can get a new notice, where there are several policies and several requests being put forward by a lot of national agencies to demand a different process for letting this information for resetting dates for courts. Unfortunately, they haven't made that very easy. In addition to that, new MPP cases are still being sent back to Mexico still, right? So there's a new risk of, as more people continue to be placed into this program, despite travel restrictions and so on and so forth, migrants are still, new asylum seekers are still being returned, and then they have to find a place to live. And again, with all these restrictions and shelters, or just like not having enough, or like not knowing who's out there, not being able to count with the Know Your Rights presentations that were being provided for the last several months, common areas like that has halted. So it has been halted. So it just means that people don't have that, and they're just, again, stuck in limbo in a way that really it's unknown how it's going to play out with their case going forward. In terms of detention, we have a similar situation. In fact, that ICE has refused to release and parole people out, particularly those who, most of them, the asylum seekers that are there, have no criminal history, have no real reason, are not essentially, should be considered flight risk. And the only fact that they are considered flight risk mostly is because they just arrived here. So the government has put this blanket, label on them as flight risk, but they do have family members, they do have safety nets in other parts of the country that could better support them, that could better help them take the precautions, the necessary precautions to be able to stay at home safely, versus staying in a detention cell where they have very little opportunity to practice social distancing. Most detention centers, they have what they call pods, where they have over 60 people regularly sleeping in close quarters, where bathrooms and showers are inside those pods. There's no privacy, and obviously there's a lot of hygiene concerns there as well. So that, and as we've seen, people being detected with COVID-19, whether it's migrants or mostly ICE officers, that they know that the risk for transmission is just a lot higher, when it doesn't have to be. And a lot of efforts that legal service providers have been putting forward is not necessarily in terms of following their regular asylum rights claims, but it's more of a health concern, right? This is a public health concern, and therefore necessary and new measures should be taken. There's been a lot of transfers in between ICE detentions. There's a lot of lack of transparency in terms of information. When we try to get some answers from some of these officers, we don't really get a clear answer. And so it's really frustrating for advocates and service providers to be able to just try to know what's happening with one individual case or with, one detention center, because as always, they just kind of will say, we'll give you information on a case-by-case basis, or, we're trying to figure this out. But in reality, they wouldn't have to be in this position if they chose to parole people in an effective manner.
Well, thank you, Dr. Stack and Edith Tapia, for such a important presentation, and really focus on really one of the most vulnerable populations right now. We appreciate that.